Welcome to Spokane Community College and all people joining us virtually to our SCC Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration speaker. I would like to start out by acknowledging the land in which we bring you this presentation. We are honored to acknowledge that the community colleges of Spokane and our main campuses are located on the traditional and sacred homelands of the Spokane tribe. We also provide services in a region that includes the traditional and sacred homeland of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation and the Kalispel tribe. We pay our respects to tribal elders, both past and present, as well as to all Indigenous people today. This land holds their cultural DNA, and we are honored and grateful to be on their traditional lands. We give thanks to the legacy of the original people and their descendants and pledge to honor their stewardship and values. I challenge each of us to reflect on these words and honor them. Spokane Community College has a deep commitment to improving diversity, equity, and inclusion through education, and speakers like today's allows us to increase our awareness and be inspired to create change. My name is Guillermo Espinoza, and I have the pleasure of serving SCC as the Director of Student Success, Diversity, and Equity. This virtual presentation was made available by bringing together a few different groups at SCC, including the Center for Inclusion and Diversity, the Black Student Union, Phi Theta Kappa, Student Activities, and District Marketing. A huge thank you to all the members of these groups. We have reserved some time for some questions at the end of our presentation. If you ask them in the chat on YouTube, they will be forwarded on to me and I will ask our speaker. In a virtual world, we invite interactions from our guests this way. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Fred Davis. Frederick is an accomplished diversity, equity, and inclusion professional with experience as a senior leader. He acquired his bachelor's degree at Colorado State University, where he has a 3-year letterman in football, and received his master's degree from San Francisco State University. Before starting his current role as Director of Cultural and Diversity for a Washington financial service company, Fred worked as a senior leader for a tech startup, as well as for 3 Fortune 500 companies, and as part of their talent acquisition, global diversity and inclusion, human resource function areas. His educational background, work experience, drive, passion, and leadership skills are the consistent qualities where Fred has developed a strong reputation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Fred Davis.
Thank you, Guillermo. And once again, this is an honor to be here. I actually was thinking, this morning when I was getting up, how cool is this to be able to do something like this and share information with you all? And I truly say share. I'll play my part in this exchange of information, but I'm always cautious when I always hear someone and no one defines themselves as a diversity person. I think everybody has a level of expertise, at least in their own experience around diversity, equity, inclusion, and so. Once again, this is just a part that I'm playing and sharing information with you. And my hope is to give you a call to action. You know, as we share this information, maybe we walk away with something, knowing a little something that others don't know. And so we should be doing something with it. And so once again, very honored to be here. Let me start to share my screen. Hopefully you can see so. So, Obed and Guillermo, please coach me if there's something that's not coming up. Please let me know. Okay, fantastic. So, very honored once again. And thank you for the intro. In addition to, let me see if I can move this to here. To the land acknowledgements that are where you all are primarily residing, which is Eastern Washington. Very glad that's part of the foundation of your presentations and information shared. I am actually sitting in the Denver, Boulder, Colorado area. And I want to add land acknowledgement to that area and specific recognition to the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, tribal nations, along with the 48 contemporary tribal nations that historically have land ties to the state of Colorado. And if you happen to be in another place outside of Colorado or outside of Spokane, let's take, I'd like to at least take 10 seconds and give like a moment of silence in honor of the areas where you're at, Spokane, Colorado, or any other place where you're at. Great, thank you. Thank you. So, as Guillermo said, Fred Davis, it's taken me a while. I'll do a quick introduction and then talk about what we're going to go through the dates. A little bit more about myself. I'm just starting to claim Colorado as my home state. I was born in California, but I've basically been here since high school, and my family's been here. So I'm just starting to claim it. It's a good place. And when I've left, I've lived in other areas, Tennessee, Washington. But as you come back here, as you kind of see with some of the pictures, these aren't touched up pictures. This is actually a really beautiful place to be. We had the fires, if you're in the news, we had the fires a week or so ago, but they're in Boulder County where I'm at, but not necessarily near me, but you can see the flames. And I hope many people who I know are impacted are doing okay or will be on okay. So I went to Colorado State University, which is up the street. As I always say, up the street in Fort Collins. Great place. As Guillermo said, I played sports there, but most importantly, I always like to say I got that degree, right? There's it's ironic the number of athletes that don't do that, but fortunately, I was driven to do that. That was actually my why. Football is great, cool sport. I don't love it, but it got me a degree, right? When it's all said and done. And then went to San Francisco State. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I currently do some consulting presentations here and there. That's an image of one of the places where I presented. Worked for companies like International Paper, Starbucks, PNNL in Richland, WSCCU. But I always say and acknowledge the fact that my number one job, most important job that I have is dad, right? You can see the two young people in the picture here. That's my daughter, Simo Saya. She goes by Saya. And my son, Amarante, or Tay, he goes by. That nothing outdoes that. And that leads to why I'm actually able to sit here in Colorado versus out there, because of one of them's not doing really well. So I really appreciate the flexibility of the folks at Spokane Community College and allowing me to do this virtually. And at the end of the day, I'm the youngest of three boys, and we're mama's boys. That's why I got a picture of mom in there. At the end of the day, I think they'll admit it. I think if these guys get to see this presentation, they'll admit it too. Our dad was there. He was in the picture. He was awesome, very bright man. But at the end of the day, we're mama's boys. So today, for the next few minutes, what the information I want to share, the heart of it is in that second blue area, right? Why we ain't there yet, and that's centered around the concept of this work around diversity, equity, inclusion, racial equity, multiculturalism, whatever term that you use, or whatever it's being prevalent now. It just shocks me and depresses me and brings me down that we're not there yet, right? We're not to where things have gone, and so I'm going to give a little insight on at least a few reasons why. And so my hope, when we recap and then talk about this work needs you, is that you take some of these things that I've identified and shared, and you guys take to the next level. And I'll share some ideal scenarios where you guys can hopefully do some things in that area, whether you have it as a job title or you're just an advocate in your community, your work community, your school community. And then lastly, you want to save some time for questions, thoughts, and ideas. So San Francisco State University, I went to the Bay Area. I lived in Washington, actually, and I worked for a youth and family service agency south of Seattle. And I just knew that I needed a master's degree that I took a gap. I took like 2 years off. And I tried to get into Berkeley. One of the interesting things about Berkeley and the graduate program, they go off this thing called GPA, which I didn't have a strong GPA. But, I was determined to get this master's. And so both institutions, San Francisco State and Berkeley, talked to me about doing what's called non-matriculation and all that. And that was great. But I also, it's amazing how things work out when you're determined and want to see things happen for yourself and other people. That I ran into someone at a Chinese New Year's party, and she happened to work admissions at San Francisco State, and she just took me under her wing. As I always say to people, if you crack the door for me, I'll get in, and depending what the situation is. So that was an awesome experience. Deanna Wong, I'm still in touch with her to this day. One of my favorite professors, and actually I had, let me talk about my major. It was actually called it was Master of Arts Special Major, and it allowed me to take classes in 3 different disciplines. So ethnic studies, psychology, and organization administration. And my thesis statement around that was I wanted to learn how people can learn and unlearn intolerance, right, at the time. So in the psychology around that, and then how can people and organizations kind of get above that and beyond that. So it was an awesome experience. For those that know the Bay Area, I actually worked in Richmond School District during the day. It's now called West Contra. I think it's called West Contra Costa Unified School District now. But I worked in the Richmond schools. If you've ever seen the movie Coach Carter, that's Richmond. And then took classes at night. And it was a complete different experience from my life here in Colorado. But I loved it. I loved it. Concepts, theories, all these things were awesome. And then the Ethnic Studies program was one of the founding programs in the country. And so the instructors reflected that. They put a challenge to all of us. Once again, you're going to get information most people don't know. We're going to expect you to go out there and change your communities where you're at. So loved the Ethnic Studies program at San Francisco State. So that's my commercial over there. And I can't encourage people enough, as you finish your associates or whatever certification you're going through where you're at now, please, if you have aspirations to get a graduate degree, I can't tell you, find a way if you can to get it done. It does open some doors for you. Plus it's awesome learning experience. Dr. Wade Nobles was my favorite professor there. He was in the picture before. And as you could see, he does some other program work in the community, but he was literally one of my favorite professors. Grad school was literally the best I ever did as a student, believe it or not, because you have to maintain a certain GPA or you get out. There's no warning letter, nothing like that. You had to get out. So one of the interesting things that he did on the very first day of class, Dr. Nobles, was he told us that there are, I think there was like 24, 25 of us in the classroom. And he said, I only got room for 18 of you. So you all need to figure out who's going to go. And so this class is once a week for about 2.5, 3 hours. And so he literally, he had a pad every day. He had like a pad and a pen. He didn't have much more than that. He was bad. He was an awesome professor, educator. And so he kind of he threw that out there and kind of leaned back, put his hands behind his back and just kind of and his feet up on the desk. And so he just let us talk it out. It was quiet for about 5 minutes. And someone finally says, I need this class. And someone says, I need this class. I want to take this class. So we actually went through a discussion as a group. And at the end of about half hour, 45 minutes of discussing, we promised 3 things. One, we're going to all work hard and stay diligent on the assignments. B, we were going to help each other out, make sure we studied together, make sure we all, didn't add burden to the teacher. Right. And 3, we were going to make sure we supported the instructor in the work. So we wanted to make things easier for Dr. Nobles. And so he said, perfect. That's exactly what I want you to learn. And that provided us a concept of what he called cultural deep structure. And so that was an awesome experience. One of the next things he did for us too, which goes into this first thing here, concepts, theories, or a gun, was, and as we go through the next few minutes, what you may want to do, I have a pad and pen here, because I'm going to kind of take notes as I go through some things and get some ideas as we actually flow through this. But if you have a pen and some paper, and you want to take some notes, because I'm going to ask you some things. And once again, I really wish I was there to talk with you all, but we're doing this virtually. So maybe as you jot down some of your ideas, or some of the things I'm going to throw out to you, you can bring it up at the end. We'll make sure we have enough time. So the interesting thing that Dr. Nobles did in the class one day too, is he shared this picture. Now, this is Shara Bartman, and she was alive in the late 1700s, the early 1800s, and she was put on display in Europe as what they call a Hottentot. Kind of weird. I don't know where the word came from, but this was the image that he shared with us, and this is what, if you can actually Google her name, Shara Bartman, and you can find out that she actually was taken from Africa and put on display in Europe, and was kind of like, it was like part of a circus show. So he showed this picture to us of Shara Bartman, and he said, prove to me that she is not inferior to the white man. Right. So as we go through this, I'm going to be pretty blunt in language. And so it's going to be universal, but hopefully it'll be effective what we're doing. I'm not going to just blurt stuff out just because, but I want to make sure we're pretty upfront and honest in what we do. So on your piece of paper with pen, as you think about things, maybe mentally you're able to do this as well. If you could just think to yourself, how would you, if someone said this to you, how would you take it on? Prove to me that Shara Bartman, this picture, this image, is not inferior to the white man, especially if you look at this, something like this 300 years ago. So I'll give you a second to think about that. How would you take on this debate if somebody tossed it out to you? The interesting thing about this, when I think about this was an awesome learning experience too, because we went back and forth as a class, and Dr. Nobles said, people said, it's not right. You don't say that about people, right? We're all in this planet together. We're all equal. We're all biological. He's like, whatever. I hear you guys. That's not it. How do you defend this when it's all said and done? And if you think about the core part of the presentation today, is I want to talk about how we can be more articulate in arguing when we hear derogatory or questioning terms like what's going on here. So the concept of constructing, deconstructing, and reconstructing someone's comment is what he was trying to get across to us. So after about a half hour, 45 minutes of hearing us kind of blurt really passionate stuff around diversity out, the key word in there, y'all, I want you to see is inferior. Prove to me she's not inferior to the white man. So what someone shouted out is, what does he mean by inferior? Are they faster? Are they, is she identified as less intelligent because she doesn't know English or French? Can she not lift enough? And so one of the things that can be done and what I think we've lost in kind of putting and continuing this fight, some people are awesome at it, is how to assertively argue for what you are passionate about. So deconstruct, reconstruct, and construct arguments. So if you take that word inferior, you can chop them up, right? If you say, so do you think she can't do what you can do? Do you think she's not fast enough? Okay, well, how does that make that person inferior, right? Right. And then if it gets into a point where someone's saying that you're less intelligent, how do you prove that? Was it a specific test that they took? Let's look at the validity of that test. So once again, we all get really passionate. I do, when he first said this, and, it was insulting, right? This is African woman who was equal to us all. But we have to learn to debate and assertively address issues when they come up, because those people who are implementing policies and procedures who historically and currently are, believe it or not, they're being very specific in their language. And so we have to make sure we're armed with the appropriate things. So when I went back to the title of this area, Concepts, Theories, or a Gun, that was one of the things that Dr. Noble said, that's how you make change, with concepts, theories, or a gun. A gun is extreme, right? We don't want that. I'm not encouraging anybody to get weapons out of this thing. Use your head first, use your mouth, and make sure that you're strategic in what you do when we take on this fight. So once again, if we get time, I'd love to hear if what people have about some thoughts around this part of the presentation. Next, data versus telling a story. And so Obed or Guillermo, if we're able to, I'd like to be able to show a video I'll get to that in a second. So you guys may have to coach me on how I can show this YouTube video. And I'm sorry for popping this up on you guys. Just be a couple if we can do it. So data versus telling the story. On this table, one of the things that you'll see is that you see the words quantitative and qualitative, right? You guys are at a quality institution, so you've probably heard these terms. But when I use these strategies to influence change where I've worked, it's usually been more quantitatively. So it's quantity, right? You're talking about numbers. And some of the key words that you might hear around data or statistics or metrics, or what they call key performance indicators or KPIs, key performance metrics. There are times when I work with HR departments and I'll talk to them about the data around the number of applicants for a posted position. So if you post a position, I can say you have 100 applicants and 33 of them are people of color, right? African American, Latino, have identified as people of color. 10 of them have identified as military veterans, right? And then 50% of them have identified gender. So I can look at that kind of data, and then I can also say, here's your applicant pool. They call it applicant pool. Here's who you interviewed. Here's who you hired. I can say this to a hiring manager. Here's who here's how they're performing, and here's who's left after 2 or 3 years. So I can go to a manager and take that quantitative data and put the information out, right? And so as students or at a school or wherever you work, you might want to say, we need more, here's the student population, here's the faculty. We want more equal diversity to represent, right? That's something that as students you may bring up. But there's also qualitative. And if you look at the right part of this slide, is that you will see that hearing the story, hearing somebody speak from their heart and their head to talk about their experiences is also incredibly important, right? And so there's actually a really cool, when I was in grad school, it was shared with me that there's a really cool virtual platform, that if you do enough qualitative interviews, or you can actually start pulling out keywords to help, once again, to help advocate for change. So Obed and Bjorn, so let me see, please share the screen with audio. There's a checkbox. Okay. Okay, give me. Should I check the volume? Let me see. How does that sound?
We can't hear it, Fred.
Okay. How should I? Please share the screen with audio. And there's a checkbox that I can hit. And the menu, screen share. Okay, we'll okay. Well, I will tell the story. I don't want to take up too much time trying to work on my flaws on technology and not practicing. But basically what I wanted to do is share with you all that there's a really cool video that talks about the work done by psychologists in Arkansas in the 50s. And what they did was have a doll that was of obvious African descent, African-American doll, and a white doll. And they gave those to kids in Little Rock, Arkansas. So, because they were trying to integrate the schools at the time. And so the actual dolls were displayed. And that's the 2-minute video I was going to share with you guys about that. Because what the psychologists did to help provide the legal team that was pushing for integration with knowledge is that the qualitative feedback from these kids were that when they look at themselves and look at images of themselves and they see dolls that look like them, they're demeaning, right? There's the psychosocial effect around this stuff. So obviously if they did a vote in Little Rock, Arkansas, who wants to integrate quantitatively, it wouldn't happen, right? But qualitatively, they took that feedback from enough young people, enough kids to say, we got to do something right about this. So please don't ever undervalue the importance of that qualitative feedback to help you advocate for something, especially if you're at an organization or institution that claims to have to care about the well-being of their employees or their students, right? However it pans out, or their members of the community. If one person has a beef and one person is able to come from their heart and head and say, here's what I think about if we don't do this, regardless of what aspect of diversity that you're working for, it's incredibly powerful. Numbers are great, huge. Data helps also move stuff. But I have found more and more when I've had the lobby to senior leadership at organizations like Starbucks and National Paper, they're like, oh, wow, they said that, they feel that way. So it was awesome. Once again, as we go through this stuff and you're jotting down stuff, questions, we'll make sure to go through all this stuff. So this one's going to take a little time. So I want to spend some time on this section. Once again, why aren't we there yet? We talked about using concepts and theories. We talked about data and being able to pull information together from the people you're seeking to advocate for, especially when we're lobbying from a diversity perspective. And then one of the things that we have found out, or I have found out, and that's why I really loved my experience at San Francisco State to talk about the psychological aspect and impact on diversity, is one of my favorite. I'm old school hip hop, right? Old school. KRS-One is one of my favorite hip hop artists. And so I used to teach adjunct classes at adjunct faculty. So I taught at both Pierce College and Tacoma Community College when I worked there. And so I remember I was listening to Edutainment by KRS-One, for those that can identify with that. And he has a song on there called The Racist. And I was like, man, I want to explore that. I want to dive deeper in that. So that's kind of where this came from. This comes from. And I want to go over this with you. So in doing diversity work, where I'm at now at WSSECU and other organizations, the task of doing diversity work is actually a lot. So it's not just race and gender stuff that we're doing, right? It's actually, this wheel represents all the aspects that fall under my umbrella of accountability. Everything from job classification to military experience, marital status, socioeconomic level. When I was at Starbucks, we actually even did some advocacy on behalf of employees that wanted to have tattoos, right? And want to display their tattoos as well as piercings. So all that fell under, and it's a lot of work, right? To address these various kinds of isms. But for the sake of what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, please, I want to lock in on just one of these, which is under race, right? And so having said that, right, I don't want to devalue the other aspects of diversity of the work that I've done over the years, but for the sake of these next few minutes, I want to make sure we lock in on this concept of race. So as I go through this next section, so race, racism, racial bias, right? So I'm assuming you all know this, but I'm just going to highlight it more. But when I use these terms, what I'm talking about. So race is itself is a biological myth, right? I'm not going to read all the definitions word for word. So I'm assuming we all know that. There's no way in the world 7.5 billion people on the planet fit neatly in the categories listed at the bottom of the slide, right? White, Black, Native American, Hispanic. When you check the box for school or for jobs, you're getting these options, right? They actually, more times than not, they ask what your ethnicity is, but they give you racial categories. That's a whole nother thing we'll talk about too. Racism is a systematic, it's a fact, right? It's happening. It's institutional and it's systematic and it's centered around white supremacy, right? Racial bias is something we can all have. There are some people who will argue, and we can talk about this at the end, and I'd love to have a great discussion on that say racism, only certain people can be racist, or represent racism, right? But racial bias we can all have. And what I mean by racial bias is when you look at somebody and put them in one of those 5 categories down below, and you think you actually have some ideas about who they are and how they behave and how they think and their abilities, right? So race, racism, racial bias. The 9 kinds of racial bias, right there. There's 8 smaller circles and there's 1 circle in the middle. And so we're going to break this down a little bit. So, some pop up. So when, so let's do this, right? I've done, the cool thing about this presentation, I've done versions of this for senior level people at Fortune 500 companies. I've done it with 8th graders, right? Everybody kind of gets this basic aspect of this, of what we're about to go over. And we'll kind of see kind of how dynamic just one ism is, right? So let's just take, let's say the average racially biased person, let's just say that their name is D, right? Let's say they grew up in Spokane. They went to one of the local high schools there in Spokane. They went to Spokane Community College, and they transferred to Eastern Oregon to study marketing, and then ended up moving back to the western side of the state of Washington and got a job at Nordstrom's, right? Let's say right now that D is late 20s, early 30s. D hangs out with most of the people of the same racial category as they are, right? So we're going to talk about racial bias. So D hangs out with people mostly of the same racial category socially as they are. D's dad is a blatant racist, right? I'm gonna kind of describe these a little bit. And as I go to the description of these different people that surround D, if you can think, wow, I know somebody like that, and this is their behavior, right? I know someone who says stuff like that. Because once again, we're talking about why we ain't there yet, right? And so I just want you have examples of these, or probably in a lot of the people that you've interacted with. D's dad, blatant racist. Once again, he truly believes in the racial categories. He believes that they're fact, and he believes that the racial group that he belongs to is superior to the others, right? So he, if he thinks someone's poor, right, trash, he'll say it. Some nigger, spick, chink, whatever, he'll say it. And then sometimes say it to their face, right? He's angry enough. So once again, a blatant racist, D's dad. D's mom is a scared racist, right? And so let's say that she gets most of the information about the world from TV, from her husband, let's say they're still married, the magazines in the grocery store, and her social group, right? So there are certain parts of the community where she currently lives that she will not go to because of what those people might do to her, because of what they might say or what they might physically do, right? And so that significantly impacts the things that she says and does and her perspective on things, right? So D's mom and dad. So mom is a scared racist. Dad is a blatant racist. D's brother, let's just say these terms are interchangeable. I use them as terms as nice guy or a nice girl, but in this case, nice guy. All right, D's brother is what we call a nice guy, racially biased person. He'll be the first one to say, I'm not as bad as my dad, right? My dad is kind of extreme. A lot of the time, though, in his wording, when he talks about people of another racial category, he'll use the word "but," right? He says, he'll say, "I'm cool with Asians, but I just don't like white people." And sometimes the "but" is implied, right? He might even say, Jimmy's fast for a white boy, right? He might say something like that, right? So there's that subtle kind of thing in there, and that he is tied into, and he believes. And sometimes even right before, let's say he's a little bit younger than D, early 20s, 19, and he gets in fights, and say, usually sometimes right before a conflict with somebody or a fight with somebody, he'll make them an object, right? They may as well be a pair of glasses as opposed to a person or somebody he went to kindergarten with, right? He's got to objectify that person before he feels he can do harm to them or say something violent or do something violent to them. Okay. Once again, think about these things and people that you may know who are this way, right? And I'm just kind of dichotomizing the behavior of racial bias. Dee's neighbor, let's say she lives in some apartments on the western side of the state, and she's got a neighbor who we call a money racist. So the concept around this is that we know that there's people who are benefiting financially, maybe even socially, from the fact that racial bias still exists, right? I used to, when I first started doing this presentation, I used to sometimes say that somebody like a comedian, I don't know if you guys ever seen like a comedian who only uses mostly racial jokes. I'm like, come on, expand your repertoire, be more dynamic, right? That's all they pull from. If some of you are very conscious and aware of the concept of redlining when it comes to real estate, there are some people who only sold houses to certain people of a racial category in certain neighborhoods because of the financial connection to that. And that still may be going on in some areas, I dare say. But there's some people who make money. They like the fact that people are still stuck on stupid, right? That's a phrase that I use a lot. And my kid's mom uses a lot. She teaches middle school math. And so they like the fact that people are ignorant and they're benefiting from it. They're leveraging it. They'll even throw out some stats. I see a lot of this on TV, especially during election time, that we have the Hispanic community in Benton County will vote this way, right? Now, how do you really know how all Hispanic, because first of all, Hispanic is a very broad term. How do you know how they're all going to vote, right? For the most part, the Black community in LA County is going to vote. It's these kind of things that people say, and they say it as if we're going to just buy into it 100%, right? Surrounded by these people, right? And if nothing else, what I hope we start to see as we go through this part of this presentation is this is a complex issue, right? Just the concept of racial bias is complex. There's homophobia, there's sexism. We could have 9 kinds of sexists, 9 kinds of homophobics, 9 kinds of xenophobics, but we're focusing on this. And my point here is, as we continue to go through this, folks, is some of the solutions that have been put out there for us over the years, 20 years, whatever, are not as complex as the problem. How are we going to address this issue effectively if we don't really know how dynamic this is, right? He's best friend, unconscious or passive, unconscious, that should be unconscious, or passive. And so what we mean by passive is, let's just say Dee's friend can't believe in 2022, racism is still going on. She loves everybody. I can't believe that people still, I don't see color. I love everybody. This is beautiful. It bothers me that racism still exists. Now, when I say passive is that if somebody tells a joke, if somebody says something intolerant, she doesn't say or do anything about it, right? So just lets it happen. And sometimes when you bite your tongue, when you don't say something, people assume you're on their side. You're buying into what they're saying, right? So it seems to me, I think about these historical events. I think about the implementation of Japanese camps. I think about Wounded Knee. I think about 3011 lynchings that happened post-Civil War. Seems like somebody or a group of people had to say, this ain't right, right? This ain't right, but they didn't speak up. Or at least they knew in their heart it wasn't right, but they didn't speak up. And horrific things happen, right? When I've had this discussion, if we were there in person, I'd love to, if anybody has a classroom, when we get over this crazy, back to this new normal, I'd love to be able to present this and have discussions with people about this. This is what's been so powerful about doing this presentation. People are like, wow, I didn't realize sometimes biting my tongue is equally as harmful, right? If I'm out with my friends on a Friday, Saturday night, and someone tells a joke and I don't say anything, they probably think I'm on the same page. And I always say to people, especially with this one, is it doesn't have to be a big, huge I have a dream speech at your friend's house or the back of the car. Sometimes just say, hey, man, that dang funny, right? And you might have laughed last week, but you're not laughing anymore. Look, I can't do that. That's not cool to me. I'm trying to be a better person, right? And I'm moving on. Cousin. These cousin, for the sake of this activity, is what we call a scapegoat racist, right? And so by scapegoating, there's a lot of finger pointing and not a lot of pointing the finger back at themselves, right? It's usually the white man's fault, or these new immigrants coming in from Mexico coming in fault, or the Asians come take our job. All these kind of things that they're going to blame on somebody else and not the other person. I thought it was really powerful one time when I was presenting this to a group of eighth graders way back when. One of them actually said, hey, he was honest. He said, it was almost like therapeutic. He said, I do that. And so I call my teacher racist. I know I come to school late. I know I'm not doing great work. But if I call a teacher racist, my mom gets off my back and is blaming the school, right? Or something like that, right? So once again, a lot of finger pointing, not taking ownership for the actions that you can take to make things better for yourself. Denial. And this might not be the right way to describe it, but let's just say Dee's coworker at Nordstrom's is denial. And I thought this was pretty powerful when I actually over the years have developed this presentation by feedback from people. And so one of the things that came up in a conversation when I was doing this in the Bay Area one time was that someone was sharing with me that people who are ashamed of who they are because they have bought into the stereotypes, seeing their skin is too dark, their eyelids are too thick, their accent's too heavy. So they're ashamed of who they are, right? They have bought into it. They've spent money on changing the things that they are most ashamed of: their nose, their skin. I heard one time someone was telling me the details of some women who are of obvious Asian descent, and they will get a surgery to get a crease in their eyelid. And sometimes it'll be like a quote unquote back alley version. So their eyes will. So once again, it's surrounding. And one of the interesting things I want you guys to think about as we go through this is you might see yourself and as we go through this stuff. Shoot, I do. I'll be honest. This in some ways, this is like I've shared with people that I'm not, I grew up in America, right? I'm better than I was, but I'm not where I want to be. I know I've said some biased things about race, gender, sexual orientation over the years. I'm ashamed of those things, but I want to get better. But I also know I have that quick kind of half a second thing. And so once again, as we do this work, if you don't acknowledge your own flaws, we won't get through this, because someone will identify that dishonesty. Guillermo, I'm gonna use you as an example. Hope it's okay. I'll read the chat later if not. Imagine if you have a director of your school diversity place, and they and you hear them say something biased, right? That kind of takes credibility from the great work that they do. And I'll be honest, man. I don't know if you guys. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I'll bring it up. We're keeping it real. It's just us here, right? I will say, in my work over the years, I have heard some of the most sexist and homophobic comments by people who have been who are against racism, right, or racial bias. Does that make sense? So it's hard to be an individual who has to address all the things in that diversity circle, right? But we have to do it in our work. I'm committed to do it in my work, but it's also sometimes you got to catch people on the carpet. And I've even had to tell companies, you can't pick, and it's not a menu option of which aspects of diversity you want to address. We have to address all this or nothing, or we lose our credibility, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense. So we're all working on ourselves. So if you see yourself, and there's sometimes I'm probably one version of it than another, right? So we're working on it, but we got to identify in some way, shape, form. Lastly, Dee's boss at Nordstrom is a quota racist. Let's say her boss or their boss is big on just numbers, right? And they toss out numbers. We need to get our data, right? They're big on like those quantitative metrics. We need to get our people of color numbers up to buy more products and services. We need to make sure that we're engaging with communities and Latino, because I know we know that 10% of them will vote for us or not buy or come, and education. I remember I ran into a lot of people who were big on test scores of Latino and African American, right, and Native American. But then when you ask them why do they care, so it's more to get somebody off their back, right, the superintendent off their back. Do they really want to make authentic change in the lives of these people? Maybe, but that's not the first thing that they said, right? So kind of flew through that. I hope that all makes sense. It's just complex around these things. So one of the things I want to ask you guys on your pad of paper and pen, if you can kind of jot it down, or once again, or mentally, I'd love to talk about this as we finish up, is the concept of hate and anger. I got something in chat here. Let me pull out. Oh, okay, 10 minutes left. Okay, I'm gonna fly through. So hate. When you think about this, and I'll try to kind of rush through these last few minutes, but the concept of hate, when you look at the people that surround Dee, which one of these folks are primarily about hate and anger? Who just does not like someone because they bought into it, right? Just think about that. Next, selfish and greed. Who is selfish and greedy? Which one of these folks that surround Dee in their life needs this racism and racial bias thing to exist? Otherwise, they got nothing, right? And ignorant. Who's just ignorant? Who doesn't know that we're all, I don't know, using Bob Marley, we're all at least 50th cousins, right? That's one of my favorite lines from the song. We're all at least 50th cousins, if you think about it. That racism myth. They just don't know, right? And if that's the case in 2022, if someone's in their late 20s, early 30s, and they are racially biased, who's to blame? Is it them because they should know better? Dee, right? Dee should know better, or is it somebody in her circle? Because somebody could have, I think racial bias is a dysfunction, right? It's any kind of bias. So someone could have biased family, but then they turn out a little more healthy, right? Someone could have healthy family from this kind of work and they come out kind of unhealthy, right? I hope that makes sense. Once again, we're looking at why aren't we there yet, right? So one of the things that we spent some time in the 9 country race, this is complex thing. And I just hate, one of the things I used to really bother me, and I'll hop to these next ones real quick, was when if you're in a small rural community and you want to do, and you have racism and your examples of racism and racial bias in your community, and you just say, well, let's have a Dr. King event and we'll have some dancers and play some music. And you have a lot of people who are blatantly racist. They're not going to change. As a matter of fact, they're probably going to be more upset that you made them go to that, right? What are some things you can do? Maybe it's around policies, procedures, and say, look, for the next 6 to 8 hours while you're in this building, at work, at school, we need you to behave this way, right? There's different ways to address it. And it's a trigonometry problem. And I think a lot of our solutions have been really add and subtract. 2 more slides, and then we'll kind of wind up here and hopefully have some time for discussion. But the next step was around using clear terms. And actually, let me go back. So not clear terms and purpose. So people aren't clear on the terms that they use, like gender identity, gender expression, unconscious bias, microaggressions. People are starting to use terms interchangeably, and it's confusing. Racial equity versus diversity and inclusion, protected class. As you want to be an advocate for this, if you don't know some of these base level terms, the difference between race, ethnicity, nationality, the fact that Brazilians don't like to be called Hispanic, or you're going to be in trouble. One of the things that often has caused trouble in a work environment where I've worked at was someone say, hey, let's have a diversity meeting. And I'll say, about what? What about diversity? Is it going to be race? Is it going to be about gender? Is it going to be about people with disability? What's the work that we're going to be doing? I I'd love to advocate and support you, but what's the work that we're going to be doing? Because I have an agenda myself, right? And I want to make sure we're clear. And even if you are going to pull a committee or a group together and talk about diversity, just say, look, this is what we're going to talk about today about diversity. Otherwise, people are going to get frustrated and leave and talk about you in the parking lot. And a couple other things, and then we'll wind down here. But the interesting thing around that's also coming up around the challenge around this stuff over the years, which is interesting, is I just read this article about unbiased training is not working, right? There's people who are making a bunch of money, consultants doing unbiased training, but they're doing the same presentation wherever they go, regardless of what the true issues are. And so I've even seen some unbiased training where it's truly making white, straight Christian males feel guilty and ashamed of who they are, right? And that's none of this stuff should be about that. There should be nothing about blame, shame, or guilt. But we are going to talk about the truth. We are going to talk about white supremacy. We are going to talk about oppression. But the goal is not to once again cause you blame, shame, or guilt. That's a waste of energy. Just last night too, when I was getting ready for this presentation, I was on Indeed and I plugged in jobs under diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of jobs out there now for diversity and inclusion. For companies. The interesting thing is, what I think about now, after all these years, as I've been doing it myself, right? I'm kind of hypocritical myself about it, is I know when I was doing diversity work at Starbucks, the true ROI of my work, the true metric of my work was there more people buying coffee, right? I don't know that we made the world a better place, but I know that we had kind of opened the door so people started buying more $4 cups of coffee, right? At International Paper, when I was doing it, we trying to get more people to use the product there or service there. I really think there's an opportunity to do both. I think there's a great to help a company. We all got to make money, but there's also a way to really make the place, that your communities and your work environment's a better place. Recap. Once again, I'll fly through this, and I apologize for the time, but I'll definitely try to leave this with Guillermo, the PowerPoint. So the challenge to you all, turn knowledge into action. It's great to be passionate if you are about this work, but also be strategic, right? Think this through. Think about the consequences. Think about the cost. All these kind of things are going to be important. And don't be shocked when you run into someone who's not drinking from the diversity or racial equity Kool-Aid. You guys live in a part of the country where I'm sure you're hearing a broad spectrum of people of different political views. That doesn't mean you don't stop doing it. That doesn't mean you don't stop. You use those, the next part, you reconstruct, deconstruct, and construct arguments to let them know, look, if I communicate this right, you're not excluded, man, right? I'm talking about veterans. I'm talking about people with disabilities. I'm talking about baby boomers. It's not just race and gender stuff, right? Data and stats are cool, but also the individual stories. So don't forget that. Keep in mind, because we talked about the different kinds of racial bias, that this is, as I used before, this is trigonometry. Don't have simplistic solutions to the problem. We got to be very complex in what we do. Be clear on your terms, purpose, and objectives. If you're having a meeting, if you're pulling people together, if you're speaking to it, if you're interviewing and someone asks you that diversity question, keep in mind these type of things here. Innovate and collaborate. Please keep in mind too, I'm so excited about this learning generation that you guys are all part of. The platforms, the tools, the technology. Don't exclude anybody from your efforts. You'd say, look, we're going to talk about women's issues when you come to this meeting, but you can come and join us, but just understand what we're doing. We're not going to tweak it. Please, but you're more than welcome to join us. And then use these platforms, man. I'm so excited that, my daughter who's 15 now is talking to people on the other side of the planet in a way that I never did at that age, right? Never stop learning, and know and remember, right? If especially as you do this work, I think one of the things that has really helped me be effective, if I've been deemed that way, is that I understand some of the historical challenges and oppressions and policies and procedures that have happened against specific community groups. And so if you don't know that, then you have to go back and learn, and you wasted time. So if you can go into a debate, conversation, or strategic meeting and have a knowledge about the history of African Americans in the Puget Sound area, or the history, as we started the meeting off, and acknowledging the tribal communities that were part of where you live, that's going to be key. Questions, thoughts, ideas. And so, Obed and Guillermo, I hopefully I did it in a certain amount of time. and I encourage people to please, if I can leave my contact information, I'm always down to talk about stuff with people and support them. I'll tell my dream. Since it's Dr. King Day, I would love if this next generation of people partnered with especially at a school site, partnered with their diversity office and got ready to, a lot of us that do this work now, we're probably in our 40s, 50s, whatever. We need the next generation to step up behind us. It'd be great to have like an incubator like they do in the tech world and do something. I would love to find funding for that and do that going. I'm working with some consulting companies now and bring that up, but if any of y'all are down for that, please ping me. I'd love to get some quantitative and qualitative data on who wants to join something like that. We can probably find funding. Guillermo.
Thank you so much, Fred, for this presentation. It gives us a lot to think about here at Spokane Community College with our community, our students, our wider community in Spokane and the county, the service region that we are in. So thank you so much for that. We do have a roundtable discussion happening at 1:30 at the TLC. It's also going to be available, or it's available on Zoom. Check the emails from Angela or myself for the calendar for the TLC for the Zoom link. I think that's where we'll have a little bit more opportunity to do more of a roundtable discussion with Fred on some of the topics that we've covered today. But feel free to also stop by the Center for Inclusion and Diversity. I'd be happy to talk with anyone who has questions around this topic. And we can bring Fred in on those conversations if we need to, maybe for a smaller group as well. We just kind of ran out of time for some questions here. But definitely stop by the center or stop by the roundtable at 1:30 today via Zoom. Thank you so much, Fred, for the insightful information.
Thank you guys again. And thank you guys. Please, once again, please stay safe with everything going on. That's probably why I can't be out there with dealing with exposure and all kind of stuff here. But I wish I was there to share this stuff with you and talk with y'all afterwards. But once again, I appreciate, Lori, Guillermo, Obed for working to make sure this still happened for you. It's important work to do. I can't encourage y'all enough to get out there and whether it's your job or not, every little bit matters.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everyone, for being here.